Who's the jersey in the background? Is that just the national team or?
So yes, I mean this is my We Are Belgium one, and this is. I mean, one of your question was which beverage would you otherwise be drinking, right? And of course, I'm a huge
Yes.
fan of the different Belgian beers. I have to admit that I also became quite a fan of the American beers. With their microbrewery fashion, a few decades ago, they're way more experimental than any Belgians ever were, and some of these are actually good to drink. So,
Well, I suppose they're less constrained by the traditions and law limits on
here we
how beer
go.
can be made.
Yeah,
So maybe they get a bit more experimental. But the American beers, they do use a bit more corn in the mash, in the grain mash. So it's not always
yeah.
like a barley mash. So it tends to be a bit lighter, a bit fruitier sometimes because of that. So it is a bit different. But what's interesting? Trappist beers,
Yeah.
especially some of them, are called the champagnes of the beer world because they're so light and delicate and
Yeah.
complex at the same time. So I've tried the Westfalen. I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but it's a small little 330 ml bottle. It doesn't have a label
The
on.
Westmalle.
Has this
Yeah.
little cap, and everything's written on the cap. And you can only get a 6-pack per person, regardless of who you
Yeah.
are. It's in such short supply that it doesn't matter how famous you are. That's all you get. And so every year when they release them, you've got to line up along the road on the way into the brewery, which is a monastery. And yeah, there's just this huge line, and you get your 6-pack, and you go off, buzz off home. So, look, I didn't appreciate it. It was great, but I don't think I have the beer palate to go, hey, this is great or not. So,
Well,
but have you tried it?
and I have tried it, and I must say some of these things are a bit overhyped. And of course, everybody has its own taste, right? So I always say, also to people who say they don't like beer, I'm like, well, you will like a Belgian beer. You just don't know which one yet. So you should just try them out and see which one is good for you.
Speaking about that, so you've got a bottle of champagne there. I've already got mine open, and I've got like a tumbler glass. So I'm not going to show you too much, but because it's kind of embarrassing. I don't have
Oh, okay.
Can you open it on camera? Because yesterday I was recording another episode with Karen Nelson Field, and so I shipped a bottle to her because we had time. She's in Adelaide, and as she was opening it, the whole thing flew and hit the roof. So it was actually pretty funny. So you can always top that by maybe spraying it on yourself or something. Or...
Yeah, so what I thought was very funny when I was a kid, right? I think because my father made it seem like such a big deal. I mean, obviously we didn't have champagne very often, and he was always very afraid and don't hit the ceiling and so forth. And this has never happened to me, so I find it much more controllable.
Well,
than I ever imagined as a kid. Of course, with that preamble, now I'm going to completely mess up, right?
Well, the proper way to open a champagne bottle is to twist the bottle, not the cork. So you hold your hand over the cork, and then you twist the bottle instead of your hand.
Yes, that's what I did, and it opened right away.
Perfect, and it's very controllable.
Nothing spilled out. Here we go. Since you have 4 jars already, I'll do that too. Here we go.
So this is the most popular champagne in the world, or most drunk champagne in the world. So I've got my little tumbler glass. So cheers.
Cheers.
What do you think? Nice and fresh, fruity?
Yeah, it's actually quite good. It is nice, fresh and fruity. Yeah.
King Charles VII of France made 2 brothers, Jean and Nicolas Moet, who were from a Dutch family, which hence the name Moet. So the king made them noblemen, and then that carried on to the descendants Claude Moet, who founded the house of Moet and Epernay. Okay. And that's kind of where it started in 1743. So 30 million bottles a year. So that's one of 30 million.
And you're right, it is quite fruity. I like it. So we were talking about Belgian beer before. My favorite are actually the fruity ones, the one that are not bitter, right? The sweet and sour ones, like cherry. There's one quick story that I have about peach beer, which I absolutely love. So I had my very first peach beer in New York in a Belgian restaurant. And then I had my next one in Paris in a Belgian restaurant. And so I go back to Belgium and I'm like, why on earth didn't I know about peach beer? And so my dealer, right, my main kind of Belgian beer kind of merchant was saying, well, yes, we do make it. So it's not fake. We do make it in Belgium. but it's only for export. No Belgium drinks it. so yes, you can have this delicious kind of peach beer, and it's it's spontaneous fermentation, just like the cherry beer that is much more widely known. But yeah, you can't find it in Belgium. I don't sell it. It's only for export.
That's so funny because, the same goes for yellowtail wine. Have you seen this yellowtail wine, which is a
Yeah.
kangaroo on it, right? It's everywhere.
Mhm.
We don't really drink it here. And they mass customize the flavor of the wine for each different market. So it's one of our most profitable wines. It's
Yeah.
I wouldn't say the quality, if you're a wine aficionado, is top notch. It would be on the very low end of that scale.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's a bad wine. Sells very good. You can see it everywhere. Very good distribution and very profitable for the Casella family. But yeah, so in Korea, I tried it when I was living there, and it's a very fruity kind of red style. And I was like, wow, this is very sweet and fruity. And then I got the same bottle because I went to America. I'm like,
Yeah.
it can't be that fruity. And I tried it and it was more chocolatey. And I was like, that's weird. It tastes like Napa-y sort of
Is
style.
that
And then I came to Australia, it was different
wow?
again. So yeah, there you go. Well, we don't drink Foster's either. So it's a very export thing, but we're known for it. So it's like,
Going into marketing, right? So I think Kevin Keller, that I was co-teaching with when I was at the Tech School of Business, he always told me that he's like, "Good, the one that becomes famous for your country is never what people like to drink in the country." And so, for instance, we have that with Pilsner, right? So Stella Artois, which is sold in America as the Belgian Pilsner, I mean, it's maybe the fourth or the fifth in preference in Belgium itself among just the Pilsners, right? And so, you do kind of Foster's, and so forth. So there's this thing that I think the companies, they choose the brands that are not that popular at home, and they slam the country of origin kind of effect on it for export.
Moet Chandon, did you know this? I didn't know this until today, but the Le Mans, the car race, right? The endurance car race, Le Mans.
Yeah.
Do you know this one?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the tradition of when you get the big champagne after you win a race and like spray it on
Yeah.
everyone and pour it all over yourself, that only started it was a Jeroboam of Moet Chandon, so the one we're drinking now. A Jeroboam is a 3-liter version. So the bottle you're drinking is 750
Yeah.
milliliters. So this is considerably larger than that. So, four times larger. So quite a large bottle. And it was given to him, and you can watch this on YouTube. His name was Dan Turney in 1967. And
Yeah.
he was he wasn't going to win the race, and he did. So someone on the track, when he won the race, came up to his car, gave him this big Jeroboam, and then afterwards he sprayed it to the cameras because he was like, "Oh, I didn't believe I'd win," and that's where the tradition started in Le Mans.
So cool.
So there you
So
go.
he was really just ecstatic in the moment, surprised,
Yeah,
and that's what he did.
yeah.
Yeah.
And now,
Cool.
in every podium, an F1 car race, every other car race, there's a bowl of champagne, and France champagne has really like owned that celebration and that moment, and now it's burned into our memories of like, now we associate, generally it's a prestige sport, right? Motor racing, you got to have some wealth
Yeah.
behind you to afford to do that. So prestige, moment of celebration. Now every time we celebrate, we think champagne.
Yeah. So I have
Yeah.
one very quick personal kind of life lesson about champagne, right? This is that I still don't use it often enough, so I don't celebrate enough wins, and that was something that was really interesting to me. So as an academic, every time I had a paper published in the top journal, people are supposed to celebrate. I never celebrated because I was just kind of looking to the next one, right? Always looking forward, and so you got to stop and smell the roses sometime. And so at this point in my life, I learned that hey, you should celebrate every even small win, because all these things are temporary, and you will miss them when they're gone. And you better celebrate when you have the chance.
Well, I think so too. And a lot of entrepreneurs do that. They even if it's like an activity that they like to do, they do all
Yeah.
the hard work, and then they have to reward themselves, no matter what that is, playing ping pong, doing a workout, going for a swim,
Yeah.
whatever. But it's good to, otherwise this is, just work. So you need to enjoy
Yeah.
yourself.
True.
Yeah. Okay, but over to you. I have been following some of the things you've been talking about, and what's interesting is that there is a lot of different opinions, and I think when people are debating issues, you have an opinion. Some people from other research firms have an opinion, maybe counter or a bit different to that. And I think through all these different perspectives out in the discussion, we get a lot of insight, and maybe someone hadn't thought about the practical context of some of these papers in real world application. And yeah, I just found it interesting. So I thought, hey, let's chat about that.
Okay, and yeah, that's a great topic. I think one of the key things that I learned, right, kind of coming from the ivory tower. So when I my thesis is on long term marketing effectiveness. So I graduated UCLA 2001, and I had this big ambition that I wanted to advise senior managers on what they should spend their money on. So it's kind of, you get the four P's. You can spend it on innovation. You can spend it on price promotions or doing something with that. You can enter new channels, right? So, at that time, going online was very cool. Later on, I analyzed what if you're a digital native one that goes offline, that gets physical stores. And then, of course, you have, the P of promotion with all the wonderful advertising, offline, online, influencer marketing, and all of the cool stuff you could do. So my perspective was really, well, I'm an econometrician by training, right? I get your past data, wonderful kind of over time. I estimate my model controlling for everything else, and I tell you, hey, if you increase your spending 10% on advertising, this is how much more sales and profits you get. If you decrease your price, this is what you get. If you spend on innovation, it won't pay off right away, but in the long term, this is how much you get. So I had a very kind of quantitative, how much, what's kind of idea about the world. And then when I tried to kind of talk to managers about that, I quickly learned that there's so many other considerations that come to this one, right? And one of the key things, of course, is just managing the risk. And that is something I really learned kind of within companies, also not for profit organizations, right? They have, less deep pockets, so risk is even more important. And so one of the things I learned there is just to make sure that, for instance, your tool isn't misused. so very quickly I realized kind of, just showing my model with coefficients and confidence levels, that's not going to work. So I got very early on this dashboard train. And so my first book is about analytic dashboards. And so what I mean by that one is I estimate the model based on your data, but I don't give you the output, or not the users within your company. They get a nice decision tool that they basically, they get like a scroll bar or, something else. It could be more fancy that they say, oh, this is what's going to happen if we do nothing. If we kind of put more on advertising or on price and so forth, this is how much it's projected to change, right? So it's all based on the model, but the user doesn't see the model. It's like when you're driving your car, you don't have to be a mechanic. You don't have to know what's under the hood. You just have to trust that it works. So that was all fine. And so this was a big car manufacturer at the time. And so I give that to them, and we test the user friendliness, and they, this is all great, Koen, but that's just one problem. When you allow the user input, you allow the user to set it on very strange kind of absurd levels. Like kind of below a price, we would never put it, an advertising thing we would never do. And I'm like, yes, but, I have my confidence and certainty things. And they're like, well, nobody can do with that. What you should do is just restrict the input range. And that's how we'll give it to our employees. Because what's going to happen, some people are just against using econometric models in general, no matter how user-friendly you make it. And so what they will try to do is they will put the input to absurd levels. And then, of course, your model will show absurd results. And they will just use that to kind of say, look, models suck, all models suck, we should just go with our intuition. So I learned very quickly that, people know their colleagues and their employees. And so they really helped me to just kind of differentiate the way in which I communicate things. So in my teaching, I typically have, hey, if you're basically consulting a very analytical driven company, right? And there's several of them in the world, like the Procter & Gamble's, the Amazons. Yes, I mean, there are analysts you should show your confidence levels to, and you should get all of the caveats and everything what may go wrong with your model. But when you're communicating to people who are more intuitively based, there's just a very different way that you can show your output, and that you can, reduce the uncertainty and the risk without having get into too much details.
You had a good point there, because like different customers that I deal with, different companies have different cultures. So some can be completely, I had to use the term data driven. and everything has to be number crunched, and they tend to be less creative. So they'll be good at optimizing and iterating and steady sort of growth, but they'll never hit massive inflection points because they never consider things so absurdly outside the norm that they will always stay inside that lane and within that lane's parameters. Whereas other teams will be, maybe on the other side of the scale, it'll be just very harebrained, off the cuff ideas, and there'll be a lot of wastage, a lot of things that don't work, but then they'll hit something that just goes nuts, and that thing would never have been considered by the data-driven sort of culture, right? So when you go into different companies, they're all different mixes. Some just care about politics, so they just want a funny ad that gets them promoted, it wins an award, and they want to jump ship to another company. That's what they want out of their marketing. So I find it's like so contextual, and then like you said, the brand size and maturity of organization, very different context. Like risk in terms of budget. Are we a small player? Are we a big brand that we can just sort of rest on our laurels? And then the incentive structures for employees, like, why do they care? Like, are they just getting a salary, or do they have skin in the game?
Yeah. And that is something really important. Like the funniest thing a manager ever told me. So I had this model that I showed that half of their advertising was actually wasted going to the older age, and I can show exactly where. So the firm was spending over $100 million on advertising a year. I'm like, I can literally save you $50 million. And you know what he told me? He said, Koen, I completely understand and I believe your model, right? So that was one thing. But I will never do that. And I'll tell you why. If I save my company 50 million bucks, I'll never see a dime of it myself. If I lose even 0.5% of market share, I'll get fired. So what he understood is his career versus, what was good for his company were at least slightly misaligned. I've also, to your previous point, I talk very differently to creatives and the bean counters, to use a very disrespectful terms, right? So for creators, my message is typically, look, yes, you're trying out so many different things, and then you have something that goes nuts. It's fantastic. But how are you going to demonstrate to the bean counters it was so fantastic? So I typically say, look, kind of the models I estimate, they make you shine. They make you prove to the financial folks that it was actually fantastic. Your creative had 4 times the effectiveness of their creatives in the past, for instance, and which is, something you often find. To the bean counters, as you said, the problem with creativity. So when I make a dashboard and you have, let's say, 6 places to put something, I only kind of do what the decision maker wants in like 4 out of the 6. The other 2, I show something new, something they haven't asked for. And you can do that with AI very nicely. You can kind of, with your exploratory analysis, you can say, hey, have you thought about that one? And then I show them a trend, a picture that they're like, oh, this is really interesting. And then the 6th one, it's typically, so in the old days, dashboards had like green, orange, red, like a traffic light. So green, something that is, on budget, effectiveness is good, and then orange and red. I always put a blue flag for things that go exceptionally well. I'm like, you should flag the things that go exceptionally well, which is typically a fantastic creative, or the consumers are just very much in love with your product. It's often temporary because the competition comes in or the consumers get tired of it. And so this is the thing you should right away investigate. Can be replicated, maybe in another category, in another country? Why was it effective? Can we scale it as quickly as possible? And so to people who are kind of more like dull, as you said, I like to tease them with something explorative, and I like to tease them with something that somewhere in their company or maybe in their industry went exceptionally well, better than expected, to give them some ideas to get more creative and to dig deeper.
Yeah, I love that. And I was just thinking, like, obviously you publish a lot of papers, and you read a lot of other people's papers, it's part of, academia, right? I found it always strange that there's certain cultures that call themselves data-driven. Generally, they're sort of more technically minded teams, but I find they only use one type of data, which is primary behavioral data, generally from the internal systems, and they ignore secondary research, which academic papers and textbooks and other books, some of which have been peer-reviewed, some have not, and they ignore these learnings. So they have a test culture, but they're retesting things that have already been tested and proven. And I always found that very strange. Why do you think that is?
It's people just feel comfortable with a certain kind of data, and so the whole thing of big data was not so much the first V of volume, it was the V of variety that really fascinated me. So big data for me is really have a variety of data sources, which includes people's behavior, right? What they do, very often only online, by the way. That's a big blind spot of people that think that online consumer behavior represents the world for their brand. But other people are just much more comfortable with survey questions which get to why are you doing it, and what for, right? To give you a typical example, like website visits. So in a lot of kind of models, website visits are great, right? Because managers assume that you're visiting my website because you're interested in buying a product. And so there have been some very interesting analysis at Microsoft, which shows that it's only a minority of people to visit the website, right? So most of them visit because they have already bought the Microsoft product, and that something is not working, or they're confused about something, and they're trying to figure out some information, right? Other people, which I find fascinating too. So let's say I have decided on something already, but my boss or my partner says, no, you should actually buy this other brand. So I now have to justify why I bought the brand. So I'm going to visit the competitor's website just to find information to say to my partner or my boss, hey, this is why this product sucks. So with secondary data, primary data, this, right? With asking people, you can get to so much fascinating stuff that just their behavior doesn't show. So my last paper is Journal of Interactive Marketing. We analyze that. So we look at lots of brands, and we combine what people say about what they feel and think about the brand with what they do online. And so we figure out there's actually a pretty low correlation between the two. And the really cool, it was less than zero point 0.4. So, which is really strange, right? Because if people are aware of your brand, we know from previous research that they're more likely to, of course, branded search you, but also that they're more likely to react to your digital ads because they already know you. So the correlation was really small. And then we looked at how good these things were in predicting sales. And the online behavior metrics were very good in explaining variations week to week. So yes, if you go viral, or if something really cool happens, you get more sales. But then the next week your competitor goes viral, and then your sales drop again. And so online metrics change much faster than sales metrics. So they have a lot of noise in them. Whereas the attitude metrics, which were much slower moving, they were much better predicting sales 3 to 6 months out. So what people think and feel about you is really important. I think talking about alcohol, Heineken has that in one of the things they ask is, are you in love with Heineken? Are you engaged? Are you married to Heineken? And so the assumption is that married is better than than in love with engaged. But so kind of at one point they saw that their sales were pretty nice and stable. But the amount of people who said they felt very close to the brand with those metrics were dropping. And as good managers, they took action. They're like, why is this going on? Because they knew this would kind of present problems for them down the road.
Maybe they have another response. It's like, are you cheating on Heineken? Cheating with Heineken. So you're cheating on your other brand and you're just having Heineken. That's a better question to answer.
That's a great addition there.
Look, I just wanted to go over, and what is your background, by the way? Like, just a really quick summary. You grew up in Belgium, now you're in America. Just, 1 minute, just to give us a quick background on what you do.
Yeah. Here is my We Are Belgium t-shirt. So yes, I'm originally from Belgium. Basically, my training is very classic Latin sciences in Jesuit border school. And then I rolled into economics simply because I wanted to be exposed to as many classes I had never been exposed to in mid and high school. So I did commercial engineering in Belgium, which is a combination between an engineer and an economist. And then I actually went, my first marketing class was in Galway, Ireland. I went on an Erasmus exchange there, had my very first marketing class. It was taught by a veteran who had been, practicing marketing for 30 years. He was absolutely fascinating, and I just completely fell in love with marketing. And then, I did a master's in management in a French-speaking Belgian university with Jean-Jacques Lambin. And then, I worked in a company for 2-3 years. Then I'm like, hey, how about instead of kind of working in marketing, I study how people work in marketing, and then I went to UCLA for my PhD. So 1997, booked a one-way ticket to LA from Belgium. Had never been out of Europe before, and so yeah, have not returned to the country now in 25 years.
This digital preponderance for metrics and measurement. And there's a really funny post that I saw someone do on LinkedIn today. Let me just bring it up because it was actually pretty funny. And it was someone that was just finding out for the first time that, hey, advertising will get impressions and you'll see it, for 8 weeks on end, and you won't react to it. And then you'll enter a buying situation, right? So some kind of external trigger. And then suddenly you're in market and you remember all this advertising, you remember the brand name, you like, and then you go and Google it, and then you check out. And now, if I was using digital attribution, I would be like, oh, well, that came from a Google search, so Google must be working, right? And there's this classic Tom Fishburne comment that goes, it's this one is this footwear thing, and it's like he gets the leaflet in the mail, and like the picture of this shoe is there, and then he walks past the street, and he sees a billboard, the shoe's there again. He's driving the car, and the radio's on, and the shoe tune comes on. It's an ad for the same shoe. Anyway, then he goes and does all this other stuff. It's like there's 5 or 6 of these, and then he goes shopping online on his phone and buys the shoe. And then the last slide is like this boardroom of marketing execs and looking at this big graph of like mobile attribution going, oh, well, it must have come from mobile. Let's spend more on mobile, right? And I just like, how do you approach this online versus offline, easy to measure versus hard to measure, and in different contexts? What's your approach to sort of solving that attribution puzzle?
So and that's kind of the $64 million question, right? As my advisor would call it. Indeed, I mean, first of all, it is complicated, right? I mean, I'm not going to say I have a very simple solution to this one. I think what is very important is first of all, you start with the right research question. And why do I say this is so important? So both in the analytical companies that I work with and in academia, there was this big storm a few years ago about a paper that actually shows with hundreds of thousands of consumers online that it was impossible to pinpoint exactly, if I send a digital ad to you, John, and you open it, that it changed your behavior and made you more likely to buy a product. It was virtually kind of at the 95% confidence level. And the reason that is because of the used self-selection issue. So based on your interest and things at the time, you go to certain websites. And of course, an advertiser is more likely to put this ad on, like, if you're interested in the sneakers website. And so that self-selection, right, is so strong that some people say, look, digital ads are completely useless. It's like, when people go into a pizza restaurant, you hand them out flyers that give them 10% coupon for the pizza and say, hey, they bought because of me, right? So that's kind of the an often problem, right? I think that's exaggerated because I don't think it's the right research question. So I don't have to know if I have millions of potential customers that you, John, specifically, you change your behavior, right? I always say marketing is not like physics, it's like chemistry. We don't care about what every single molecule is going to do, but we look at general tendencies, right? And these are like, the laws of marketing, but they just work on average. They don't work for every specific person. So what I'm interested in as a manager, for instance, setting my budget, allocating it over, different entities, is everything else being equal, if I increase my, my spending on, let's say, streaming TV, Amazon Fire TV, right, with, let's say, 10%, how much more sales will I get incrementally, right? So the incremental part is there. And of course, with my margins, is that profitable for me? So I like to look at these things on a more aggregate level. I think we have gotten way too deep in expecting everything from following consumers individually around with cookies. I mean, huge problems are, number one, privacy, right? And there's lots of laws, coming in to kind of stop that. The whole cookieless future is there. Number two, they ignore everything that you can measure precisely as individual exposure. So I don't have in that digital data whether you saw a TV ad. I don't have whether you walked by, when you were, in Sydney and saw a billboard. I don't see if you saw a print magazine for meetings. So it misses so many things. And one of the key kind of sins of data is that you only look at the data you have, right? Instead of what more could be influencing the consumer. So the nice thing I like with aggregated data is I can get, let's say, daily data on who, which demographics get exposed to my TV ads, my print ads, my billboards. I can link that with all my digital data. And I can see, well, in days or in weeks where we kind of put up our TV spending, we get more people to actually down the line click on our digital ads. And so TV should get part of the credit from that one. Or the other way around, right? So I think right now, a lot of people are first finding out about a brand or a product actually online. So I think that you can build a brand online. There's a lot of potential there. So it can work upper funnel. But then just like in the Tom Fishburne cartoon, there's other ways that then people interact with your content and or your ads to get there. So my kind of first approach is to say, okay, what do we really want to drive? Let's say it's sales or profits or donations, and then let's try to find everything that may have an influence on that one. Let's try to get data on these things, even if the data is not perfect. And so let's have a relatively comprehensive model to start with, instead of saying, oh, the platform that we happen to do ads with gives us these metrics for free. Let's do it with these metrics. Let's trust that engagement is actually a metric that matters. Or let's trust that, something else that the platform tells us is actually mattering to, let's say, our sales. I want to demonstrate that, getting one more view on a video, where's the money, right? So how much does it increase sales? And then basically that gives a lot of peace of mind in the companies I work with. I'll give you a typical example. So there were a lot of scandals the last years about platforms overstating views or engagement, right? And I'm like, what does it matter? Are influencers overstating or having fake followers and so forth? And I'm like, the organizations I work with, we have built a very nice model that says, okay, every time you get this many followers to engage with this influencer, controlling for everything else down the line, this is how much more sales we get. I mean, and I think kind of this is something I recommend to everybody to do. So once you have that in place, if now the influencer says, oh, sorry, half of my followers are fake, or YouTube says, sorry, you got a lot less minutes of video viewed than before, we still know how much that kind of, or we have our idea about that, how it benefits our own company. So I think that managers are just over-focused on metrics that they're given by platforms for free, without really thinking, well, how does it fit in, how does it achieve my ultimate outcome better?
Or even worse, some of the brand tracking studies that are done by certain companies that have a conflict of interest in the agency relationship, should I say. Yeah, so do you think it's always better than to have your own models in-house, or like someone like you build them and then have this independent source of data that you can kind of rely on? So you were kind of talking about here like regression testing, like, using, maybe doing a suppression test here, turning it off, putting something else on, spiking it, trying to see the incremental difference.
Yeah. So this comes to kind of what I always recommend to get buy-in in a company to change things, is to do a field experiment. And so some companies are very happy to do A/B tests and experiments by themselves. However, it's typically only on very tactical stuff, like changing a word in a digital ad. Whenever you try to get companies to experiment with kind of completely changing their marketing allocation, we're like, whoa, wait a minute, right? And so what typically helps is I have this meme approach, model experiment. So I come in kind of, I first kind of, with the stakeholders, right? I draw their mental model, how do they think things work towards the ultimate outcome? And then I typically try to get data. Sometimes it's from their company, sometimes they don't have data, and I know what's academically known in their industry, or I know some report. And so I try to get at least some, very rough numbers there. Kind of what is most important, and that is typically enough to get them to say, okay, now we feel we can do a field experiment. So, and there's been very famous academic papers, right? Like eBay just shutting down Google Ads paid search completely and seeing almost no drop in the number of customers. And so once you do these things for the company itself, then you get the buy-in and the learning for later. And then so by the way, when I saw that paper and I saw all of the things that saying, oh, nobody should ever put anything on paid search anymore. I'm like, no, oh my God, this is ridiculous. I mean, eBay is a very well-known company, and they sell what academics call search products. So products you can easily evaluate before you buy them. And I was like hypothesizing, no, if you're a lesser known company, you actually do get lots of people through paid search, especially if you have a category that is not very sexy. So my first practice price paper was with the Dutch furniture seller. And so, they were spending on paid search, and they also spend a lot on direct mail. And they basically thought, hey, we're spending too much on paid search. It was some marketing manager had proposed it. The very first year, they got a very nice present from Google. And so being Dutch, the manager were like, well, obviously we're overspending on paid search because otherwise they couldn't afford the nice thing. So it got them suspicious. And so they spent 80% of their budget on direct mail, only about 13% on this paid search. But they were office furniture. And so, you and I, even if we're the CEO or the purchase manager, office furniture is just not sexy. So we don't care about the brands. We only need them once in a while when we're expanding our office or long buying cycles. So I was like, I think that paid search is going to be specifically interesting to you, because when people type in office furniture, they're not fooling around, with a glass of champagne for a hobby. They're actually interested. And so that's what we found. We actually found that for that kind of companies, it was very effective. And so very often you see things that are done for one company that work very well. So in the case of eBay, shutting off paid search worked very well. In the case of Innovec, which was the Dutch furniture company, we actually recommended doubling it. And then we did the field experiment. We doubled it. We halved direct mail. So they saved so much money on their marketing. And we had these nice kind of, we split the country in four kind of equally similar parts to kind of do the field experiment. And that gave a lot of trust and learning for the company to proceed there. Yes, so we had, always, I try to get to a field experiment in every company, because just because it works for some other company or is a best practice, it doesn't mean it works for you.
And that's funny, because I just find it so contextual. And, there's a lot of people on social media going, oh, there's a law and therefore it applies to every situation in the same way. And I'm like, no, actually, there's a lot of nuance to it. Like, where are you in the market? Are you a leading brand or not? What are you trying to achieve? What is your strengths? Like, within certain channels, do you have an audience to leverage? Like, what's the quality of your customer base? What expectations do they already have with your brand? Like, do they view as this or not? And then there's these all interdependencies that sort of all go in. And I think if you don't have that understanding of all those different little pieces, and it's very complex, you can easily make,
and I think there's lots of fashions in marketing, right? So I mean, one of the things is the whole thing about point of difference that I always kind of had to smile with. So when I was growing up in marketing, it was all about making your brand different. It was all about point of difference, right? And that influenced so many things. So at, a fun anecdote, at the Tech School of Business, I think I was there my first or second year. And so the Tech School of Business is pretty famous in the Americas, but not in Europe. So what they were trying to do is to get more awareness among European MBA students. And so they invited a whole bunch of journalists of European, business newsletters and magazines to come over and take a look and so forth. And so I was supposed to wine and dine them because I was European, right? And they had this brochure, and it was all wrong because it was all talking about their point of difference. So they say, okay, here is how we're better than Harvard, right? We have smaller class sizes. The faculty is more accessible. You actually will be taught by them. And so they had all these things that they were better than Harvard, because that was the point of reference of the European journalist. And I'm like, you first have to establish your point of parity. Before you tell people how you're different, you first have to say that you're in the same league as Harvard. So what you have to say first is, look, we have the same or even better faculty than at Harvard, right? The salary of our finishing MBA students is this much higher. We're also Ivy League, and so forth and so forth. Because why? If they don't have the point of parity, the journalist will make negative associations. So if you say the class size is small, they will say, oh, Tuck is not so popular. If you say faculty is accessible, they will think, oh, because they're not so good. So you have to first kind of establish you're a serious player, or that you can be compared with the people you're comparing with, and then you can say, right, so we're as good as Harvard on all of these things, and we're much better than Harvard in the size of the class, accessibility of the faculty. And so this is one of the things that I really liked about Byron Sharp and Jenny Romaniuk and how brands grow, right? They went against this whole kind of point in the 80s and the 90s that you really had to just be different as a brand. You always had to think about your point of difference. And so, they came out with the insight, look, the consumers don't care that much about you. So being very kind of mentally and physically accessible is very important. And they really kind of hammered that home. Of course, now the irony is that the pendulum has switched, right? So because of the success, I now see, and most of my kind of papers about some blind spots in that approach. It's an approach that puts reach over frequency, at any cost, right? So the optimal frequency is always one in their approach. You have to just reach as many people as you can, even if they're completely not in the market for you. So that's actually very absurd to me, right? So if you if you have limited budgets, why would you spend them mostly on people who are not kind of at that moment interested in buying your product? So now we're getting back to go ahead. No.
Well, it's also the buy cycle. So if people go frequency
Yeah.
one, reach as many people in a category, right? But if you've got a really long sales cycle product in B2B, for example, can be years, two
Yeah.
years, you need multiple impressions because of the memory decay. So you need to hit them with a high frequency. And
So
what
true.
period of time are you measuring frequency? Is it a month? Is it 6 months? Is it 12
Yeah.
months? Is it 1 week? Like, frequency means nothing dependent on the time period. So like, yeah, you maybe need to hit them once a month for a long period of
Mm.
time. And then if you measure that frequency over a 12-month period, that's like a frequency of 12. So I don't know. What do you mean? Like
Yeah.
using these broad statements about, oh, we should go for a high frequency, reach everybody. But the ad agencies do like lots of reach because they can sell lots of
Yeah.
impressions. So
Yeah, that's true. And I think a lot of it boils down to the assumption about also which part of consumer thinking and behavior do you think you can influence with your marketing. So in the old point of view, you can actually make people care, right? You can do something so cool that you can make people care. And that seems to be an assumption that can a hypothesis that can be tested, right? One of the things in Ehrenberg Bass, an interesting assumption is that heavy users, you can never increase their usage. So don't focus on heavy users, because you can't increase how much they use your brand or the category. That's an interesting hypothesis. That may be true for some brands in some places. The same thing with differentiation, right? So just because overall, about all the brands you analyze, you observe that most consumers don't perceive much differences, right? That doesn't mean that it's impossible to achieve differentiation. I mean, both of us can come up with lots of brands that have been able to have a strong differentiation and have lots of benefits as a result. I mean, my 12-year-old is completely loyal to Nintendo. We're selling his PlayStation and Xbox because he's so enamored with Nintendo, because it's so differentiated in his mind that, and they got lots of benefits. So just because something is hard to do doesn't mean it's impossible. And it certainly doesn't mean that it's not worth trying, because if you can show that the benefits will be fantastic, that it may be something that as an organization you decide to focus on.
And it's funny because this whole distinctiveness thing now, I've noticed it's been interpreted in terms of visual distinctiveness. So, oh, let's put, if we've got a red logo, so there's banks here in Australia, they all own a different color logo. One's yellow, one's blue, one's red, one's green. Anyway, and now in all advertising, they'll have this kind of like accent objects that reflect the logo color because that's the distinctive brand asset. And so like, if there's a pillow in the scene, the pillow will be the same color as the logo. It'll be a red pillow with a pretty neutral rest of the background, right? And then, if they're carrying some clothes out to the washing machine, one of those clothes will be very bright red, so it's like, let's reinforce this distinctive visual asset. I'm like, No, distinctiveness can be like lots of different things. Actually, it doesn't have to be an image or moving image. In a movie, for example, in a piece of video. So anyway, I just find things get taken out of context and cherry picked, and then I think the context is lost about why you're doing that. That's what you have to ask yourself: why.
It's yeah, if that's a question to me, it's kind of, I always say to people, marketing is the hardest job in any organization, right? I mean, with all due respect to my wonderful colleagues in accounting, finance, organizational behavior, even, I mean, kind of getting out there, right? And basically influencing how people see your industry, how they buy products, how much price they're willing to pay for your brand, is just incredibly hard, because you're trying to influence human behavior. It depends on everything else, what's going on, what your competitors do, what's in fashion or not. And so it's an incredibly hard job. And so if you do see, and so there's a lot of tendency, and I completely understand that, to simplify and do whatever kind of the gurus tell you to do. And so, I mean, up to, like, I was very surprised to see Gary V in Cannes. Well, I was not surprised. I was disappointed because I'm like, he doesn't know. So I understand that there's this tendency to say, oh, TV is dead. Don't do any TV anymore. That's now the fashion, and so forth. But so in reality, you have to invent and simplify, right? Let me put it that way. Yes, you have to kind of, there's still a certain message, but you will first have to kind of kick a lot of tires and investigate a few things in your industry before you settle on that. And it should be something that is specific to you or your industry or your country, not just something that is parroted from some global guru who has seen the light about X or Y.
Yeah, or done a couple of Marketing Week episodes, writing articles or something like that. Yeah, with some opinionated statements. What about your behavior versus attitudes? Obviously, this came up when I interviewed Ross Sargent about the use of comms to change perceptions about the brands, with the predication that perception change will be sufficient to then influence their behavior, versus perhaps I've seen just raw sales act as like a product sampling experience, and that leads to more product purchases after. So that's behavior. And then through usage of the product and everything, they then form a perception about the brand, which can be very strong because it's sort of led with behavior. So where are you on the fence of this, or is it somewhere in between?
I've seen it both ways, and it comes from my analysis, right? So with in my field, I use what is called Granger causality, after the late Sir Clive Granger, which is a fantastic guy who actually spoke at some of the conferences. Also a Nobel Prize winner, but that's an anecdote. But so basically, Granger said, look, if things are changing, and by the way, causality is a very philosophical concept, right? But in a time series, if you see X changing before Y changes and not the other way around, we can say something about temporal causality. So this is how I've looked at attitudes and behavior. So in several cases, behavior changes first and then attitudes. And that's Byron Sharp's argument, and I see this in several places. So for instance, private labeled store brands, right? I've been studying them a lot. And so you can try very much to change the perception of your store brand. But in certain countries, people are very just brand image conscious, and they still won't try them. So in those cases, it's much more effective to just get them to sample the brand. You give away free sample, or you do a pay what you want scheme, right? That they can get it for free, but then they can decide themselves how much they want to pay you afterwards, which is really cool, by the way. So if you get it in the hands of people and then they taste it and they're like, oh my God, this is at least as good as the leading national brand. So that is much better the way to go. The other fun way I saw this was with Diet Coke in Spain. So I had like 10 years of Spanish data from Counter, and it was kind of, monthly attitude metrics about people's awareness, consideration, love for the brand, and also how much everything sold and their prices and so forth. And so in the middle of the data period, Coke Zero was introduced. You remember Coke Zero, right? So it comes in, and for some reason, it captures half of the market. It was just incredible, right? It was mostly guys that switched, it's black and everything. but also several women. And so I had been drinking Diet Coke from '97. From the moment I joined UCLA, I got addicted to them, and then I also suddenly switched, to Coke Zero. So what you see in the data, and this is fascinating, and so my studies, my tests show that you right away see that Diet Coke sales kind of half in Spain. It's very subtle. But if you ask people, do you know Diet Coke? Do you like them? For several months, they were still saying, yes, we like them, because I remember kind of, liking the taste. But then after a few months, you see that dropping. So attitudes were lagging sales, and reasonably, it's because people are like, when you ask them a question, they think through their recent behavior, like, do I have Diet Coke in my fridge? Did I buy it recently? Oh, if I haven't, I must not like it. And so people want this consistency, right? So the other way around, I also saw several times. So, in cars, in a lot of more kind of higher involvement products, right? Which is typically the one that, for instance, the Ehrenberg Bauer Institute does not focus on, right? They have typically fast moving consumer goods. In the more higher involvement product, if I try to sell you my Powell's bank and for you to get a mortgage with me or to put your deposit money, I really have to first change your attitude. I have to make sure that you know my brand, that you know what I stand for, and so forth. And so in so many cases, and we can show that with tests, attitudes change first. And then down the line, people say, oh, now we're in the buying situation for a bank. So yes, because we now know and trust you, we are willing to consider you, and some of this will convert into customers. So there's tests to at least temporarily show that, and it really depends on the situation, and kind of how involved people are in the category really matters, right? If I want to sell you a Powell's chewing gum, if I get distribution, I may just need one exposure to get you to try my chewing gum. But I will need maybe 8, 10, 12 exposures, maybe both online and offline, before you're actually going to become a customer of my bank. So that's a key difference.
Yeah, no, I find the same thing. 'Cause I normally work in services and complex, high value services, long buying cycles, high amount of money, a lot of risk perceptions. And for that reason, the channel mix is very different. It's very high touch, it's very personable. And it's, if I put an ad campaign out, no one would see it, no one would care. But I do use it as a support vehicle to support more of a direct sales approach. I was just talking about one company anyway, but that is very different to then if I was in an FMCG firm or CPG firm, like you said, in a sort of a lower involvement category, like chewing gum or whatever. Like, yeah, you do need ads, and you do need to go after lots of people, because everybody, chews chewing gum, and working in distribution, have a couple of ads to remind you, hey, we're still here. And that's a great growth strategy. That's effective,
I like the I like the hey, we're still here. So a lot of kind of communication is reminders, and I think that's really important to stay top of mind. Yeah.
Especially if you're already a brand leader. And this is the interesting thing. I said a tweet about this, but I think the worst thing to do is look at what someone else is doing, and go, hey, that's what got them there, I will do that as well. When you're in a completely different situation, it's like copycat behavior, and you don't understand that they're doing that not for the same reasons to grow, and you need to do a completely different sort of recipe to get yourself there. You know what I mean?
I completely get what you mean. And so when I'm teaching about, for instance, setting let's say the marketing communication budget, right? There's so many things that companies actually do. Most of them do one of the things that the professors don't recommend. So they do all you can afford, right? If you're a small company, that's it, right? You have to pay your suppliers and your employees, so you kind of spend what you can afford. But the one that I always go against is competitive parity. And so it still kind of pains me that the best way to sell kind of to your CEO a higher budget is saying, oh, our competitors are doing it, we have to do that too. And that just assumes that the competitor has exactly the same situation, the same goals, the same product advantage, or whatever that you have, which is typically not the case. So yes, I mean there are better ways to do that, and I love kind of going to companies with it. So in the blog that I posted, right, kind of how to use formulas without any data. I talk about the time, and this, the recession is apparently already here or coming, right? I talk about the time. So when I joined the startup university in Turkey, in Istanbul, so the founder was basically running about 6 companies in 5 different countries, all the way from Romania to Kazakhstan to Russia. And he's like, Koen, the recession is coming. You're my main marketing faculty. What should I do? because all of my managers tell me to cut spending, and all of the academic articles I'm reading, so he was actually reading academic articles, which is really sad, they tell me to increase spending in a recession because, you come out so much better. And I'm like, well, this is very simply, right? Here is the formula about how you should spend your budget, and it depends, crucially on the ad elasticity, right? So for 1% change in advertising spending, how much percentage does your sales increase? And he's like, good, but I have no clue, and I also don't have the data to give you to estimate this thing. And I'm like, no problem. Let's just think through it, right? So in which situations would ad elasticity increase versus not? And so we just thought through it. And so we contrasted, for instance, his bank in Romania. He's like, oh my God, we're giving so many kind of loans to people. And now the recession is coming. And so basically, this is going to be an absolute disaster. Advertising doesn't make any sense. And we actually went there and we figured out that most of the time we were just talking to people to help them better pay off their loan. So what we decided was that our advertising was completely ineffective, and we pulled back a lot more than the competitors. And the competitors actually said, well, thank you very much. We're going to take over the branches you do and so forth, and you're making a big mistake. And it turned out, no, the recession lasted for years there and so forth. Then on the other hand, he was managing Marks and Spencer in Russia. And there we were like, this is such a great opportunity, because before, Russia was booming, and Marks and Spencer couldn't afford to buy TV advertising because all the Italian and the French luxury brands were doing it. So they could only have billboards in the mall where you're already there. So we're like, well, with the recession, all of your competitors are going to cut back, so you can buy the TV time much more cheaper. So because there's less competitive ads, yours will stand out more, be noticed by the consumer, and your product is more mass appeal, so it's specifically appealing during a recession. And so there we just ramped up the spending. And so even though we didn't know anything about, what was the ad elasticity, we could reason through, will it increase or decrease in specific countries? And that was highly successful. So very much I kind of work with people and I say, hey, thinking through stuff, even if you don't have any data for me to estimate, can get you very good results.
Yeah, I love that. So you mentioned this before, but like, can you build brands digitally? I know this came up in a tweet, and it's like, oh, give me one example of a company that's built their brand entirely on digital. And okay, no surprise here, it was some advertising agency person, trying to get people to refute, that assertion. What do you think of that?
So, so that would be good. Let me think about, a few maybe offline, right? Because let's see. I mean, I've been talking a lot about Roblox, because they're the ones that actually getting some progress on the metaverse, which is a completely other kind of worms. But I absolutely love Roblox. I haven't seen, I had never seen any kind of offline advertising for them. But of course, they have a fantastic product and so forth. But I have met them online, and so this is what Google calls the zero moment of truth, right? They're saying, so you probably know the moments of truth, right? So there was the second moment of truth is when you actually use the product or service and are satisfied or not. Then P&G came up with the first moment of truth when you see them in the physical supermarkets, right? The packaging was important. And then Google came up with the zero moment of truth, which says that people typically get exposed to you very often online, right? Or by talking to other people. By the way, word of mouth offline is also very important before they even think about your category. So you know about some brands, because people talk about them, because you see some ads for them, even if you're not even thinking about the category. And this is your zero moment of truth. And so kind of, I think in digital, because people spend so much of their time online, you can definitely do that. And there's so many more products, right? So it used to be that, you had the paid search, you had search engine optimization. On a company like Amazon, you had kind of the lower funnel ads. Now you can put your videos on streaming TV. You can do display all over the web. You can have sponsored brands that show your store and your portfolio. So there's so many more cool ways that you can get in front of people and can get them to get some opinion about your brand even before they are ready to buy it. They because there's a lot of window shopping online too, right? A lot of people are just kind of in an exploration mode too, instead of only going online because they're extremely goal directed and know exactly what to do. So I think you can do it. I mean, Roblox is the first one that come to mind, but I can, I'll try to find a few of those. That's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think as well. I think the specific question was, is there a sort of CPG or FMCG, like a physical product that has
Yeah.
only been grown using digital channels? And I had to think, I'm like, nothing came to mind either, but if it does, I'll put it in. You mentioned something here about categories. I asked this question to somebody else yesterday. Like,
Yeah.
do categories actually exist, or is that a manifestation of us putting things into an area with two sidebars? You know what I mean? Like, because customers don't think, hey, I'm entering a category. They just go, oh, I actually need this to do this, or I'm on a whim, so I'll buy that product. Like, what do you think about categories?
Yeah. No, so consumer motivations is probably a better way as a marketer to think about it. Yes, they have tasks to fill, right? And they have their moods. I mean, in offline retail, we very often thought about basket size, right? So we see in your basket size whether this was your weekly planning trip or your impulse, oh, I need something, and I quickly jump in and get something. And we see very different reactions to price promotions and so forth when you do that. So I'm always kind of, I like this promotion focus and prevention focus framework from psychology. So some people call promotion focus also the growth mindset, and maybe better connection to what you know. But so in a promotion mindset, you really think about opportunities, the positive, and you either take them or you don't. So in a promotion mindset, you're much more likely to put in a new product in your basket or to go with a price deal because, oh, it's a deal, let's get it, right? In a prevention focus, you see life as problems, as disasters, and you either avoid them or you don't. So you're much more disciplined. You have your shopping list. You don't want to spend too much money, and so forth. And so we find that people in these different mindsets react very differently. And I think kind of online gives you actually lots of tools to kind of get a feeling for whether the consumer who's browsing is mostly in a promotion or a prevention set, and that can give you a very interesting idea. I mean, one of the things, for instance, and this is one of the cases I teach, it talks about how many people have things in their cart online, but then don't buy it. Whether you can convince them with a price deal to then actually hit the purchase button on their on their cart. And so there's so much information you get online that you can try to classify, based on consumer motivation or feeling, and you can adjust your marketing based on it.
That's interesting. Like, is that in a study that sort of came out of like some academic papers, like these two mindsets? Is there some sort of validity to the existence of that, or?
Yes, so this is originally regulatory focus, right? So Higgins wrote about it in the 90s. It became very popular in consumer behavior, so people did lots of experiments on it. The paper that I have on it specifically kind of see if it works in the real world. So we say, well, if this works, right? So think about the temporary price reduction. So you reduce the price for, let's say, a week by 10%, but then you go back to the regular price. And so we were like, well, people have the price shock when you go back to the regular price. So on balance, kind of how much more sales do you get? And of course, there's the whole profitability thing, right? But we thought kind of consumer, kind of the net sales effect really depends on that one. And so then we said, well, what could managers measure on the aggregate, right? So we have recession or boom times, right? We're going into a recession right now. In a recession, people, research had shown that people are much more in the prevention focus. I might lose my job and so forth. And so before us, people said, "Oh, give price promotions in recessions because people care about price." And we're like, "No, if you can permanently reduce price, perfect, right? But if it's a temporary one, people will be less happy with the deal, and more upset when you have to raise price to regular levels." And that's exactly what we find. The other thing we do is kind of when weather is abnormally hot, maybe this is great for your UK listeners right now. So when weather is abnormally hot or cold, people are more in a prevention focus. When weather is comfortable, they're more likely to be in a promotion focus. And so the cool thing is you don't have to kind of measure this for own consumer, right? You just kind of, you know the weather, or you can predict the weather pretty well, actually. And so when people are more likely on average to take deals. And so that's a econometric paper that we did, and that we showed that it really depends on those kind of things that you can predict as a manager and that are in the aggregate.
You know, it's funny because people like marketers wouldn't think about influencing moods or taking advantage of different moods, but I know this to be a fact because I used to work in hotels, and around the
Okay.
full moon, every time, because you're seeing a lot of people in traveling, stressful situations, sometimes navigating to a new place, hotel. So they tend to be pretty on edge already a lot of the time, unless they're in holiday mode, right? And so they would come to the front desk, and every day or two leading up to the full moon, and I didn't know it at the time, there'd just be chaos. There'd just be people complaining, this
About
would
small
happen,
stuff.
people are getting drunk or whatever, and it's just this chaos. And I was like, what the hell is going on? And then it'll happen again a month later. And then someone told me, oh no, this happens every time around the full moon. People just go a bit angry, and then it all goes back
Yeah.
to normal. And then, yeah, from then on, because we used to have these full moon parties that everyone used to go to, like sort of like a warehouse
Yeah.
rave. And that would coincide. And I sort of put two and together. I'm like, that's why. So, yeah.
So maybe you should have suggested these complaining guests to go to the raves. Get your inner werewolf out, and then you're all happy and you don't complain about the small stuff anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Maybe just have a bit of a party. Now, that's really interesting. Any other sort of papers that you think more marketing people could like heed the wisdom from? I know Thomas McClay or something has this ARIA thing where he's compiling some of the better papers related to marketing and sending out a newsletter, um, to fill that sort of void, like I was saying, of secondary research, because a lot of people aren't going to some of these sources and
Yeah.
heeding that wisdom before they make decisions, right? Because
Yeah.
a lot of them aren't classically
So yeah,
trained.
so
So
there's great newsletters out there. People writing blogs. So I started my LinkedIn newsletter just 4 weeks ago, I think, and already get thousands of subscribers, which was interesting to me because I have been blogging for a while, but apparently, I think it works very well for me on LinkedIn. The other person that really nicely summarizes paper is Neil Hoyne. So he's the Google chief marketing strategist or
yes, and
evangelist.
he's got a book.
Converted, yeah. And so I like his summaries. He takes the top marketing journals, so very good peer review, but then he boils it down to the essence. So yes, there's definitely the other thing I really like is the Marketing Science Institute, which is basically I think the oldest organization to really bridge marketing academics and practice. So therefore, thoughtful practitioners and practical academics, as they call it, and I think they're already 60 years in existence. So what they do is they publish these working papers, right? So typically, when I submit my paper to a top journal, it takes years before it comes out, right? If it comes out. Whereas I right away also submit it to them, and it goes through a review process, both practitioners and academics. And so the Marketing Science Institute working paper series, and they also have kind of short descriptions of the paper of about a page. That's high quality stuff that is directly relevant. That is nice to access, I find. Yeah.
Quick questions. Favorite
Yeah.
book that you're reading right now that's really changed your
Oh,
mind for the better?
I'm reading Competing on Thought Leadership, which is absolutely fantastic. It just came out. I'm meeting the author, Bob Boudet, and so it's really from experience. How do you compete on thought leadership as a B2B firm? Absolutely fantastic. What I love about this book is also that it's very concise. So I'm very impatient. So even if your book or whatever you write is good or a movie, right? If you could have told it in half the time, I'm going to be upset. This guy, every word counts, and so I highly recommend that one. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. What about a website that you'll go to? So you mentioned the marketing science website.
Yeah.
That's probably your sort of recommendation here.
I love that one. Let me plug in my own, right? Marketingandmetrics.com. So in Marketing and Metrics, I have put all of my own published papers on. So that's about 75 papers. I organize them by the 4 Ps, and then I also have like big data and word of mouth so that you can kind of see which ones have. And so they're all kind of summarized and freely available there. Yeah.
Great. Okay, and then best way to contact you. So you've got your newsletter as well. So just go and find you on LinkedIn. Your name is Koen, Koen,
Yes.
and then last name
Pauwels. Yeah. So in the Belgian
Pauwels.
pronunciation, Koen Pauwels. When I joined Tuck in 2001, they thought Colin Powell was joining them, so they were very disappointed. So yes, you would, in any other language, you would say Cohen Pauwels, but yes. it's unpronounceable, but yes, if you Google my name, by the way, this is really fun. You either get my marketing papers, or you get the other famous Koen Pauwels is a race driver in Belgium. So it's kind of a NASCAR like thing. So all of the cool car pictures are his. all of the marketing stuff is mine. Yeah.
Okay, and best way to contact you if they really liked the conversation and want to sort of get in touch?
I would say, email. Yes. So, yeah.
Okay, I'll put that in the links. But hey, thanks for your time, Koen. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much. Bye bye.